Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And today we have Rich from Buck Around Podcast here to talk some Badger football. And, Rich, it's great to have you on. I'm super excited about it, particularly because, I'm actually kind of looking at my calendar right now and thinking about taking a trip to Lambeau to see them play Notre Dame. So it was pretty fitting that we're able to make this work. And I'm really excited to have you on here.
Oh, well, stop in Madison on the way. If I was to give you advice this year, it would not be to go see the Badgers for the football product on the field. My advice would be go to visit Madison because you'll have a great time in the city of Madison. You may not have a great time if you're watching the game, unless you're a Notre Dame fan. Then you'll have a good time. But it's interesting times in the world of Wisconsin football, and thanks for having me on. I haven't gotten to be the guy answering the questions versus asking the questions in a while, so these are always fun exercises, especially to find out sort of what people are curious about who aren't swimming in the broth that is Wisconsin Badger football.
Absolutely, because it's one thing to kind of see the highlights of a team and what have you, but it's another thing to actually kind of do a deep dive and talk about the recruiting class and talk about what's going on with the schedules and everything like that too. But before we get into that, can you just give everybody who isn't familiar with Buck Around Podcast just a brief overview of what you guys do and where we can find you?
Oh, yeah. We're pretty straightforward. It is, the name gives it away. We are a Wisconsin Badger football podcast. We've been doing it, as we were just talking about before you hit the big red button, I think since it's 2014 or 2015. I forget which. I think it's 14. Yeah. Or might even be 13 now that I think about it. Someone who's one of our listeners who's watching this is yelling at us, and maybe they'll put it in the comments of the YouTube video. But if I looked it up, I could look it up. We're recording episode 376 tomorrow, so figure it out from there. We took a little hiatus right before COVID. Thankfully, we didn't try to produce a podcast during COVID. That would have been exciting. But yeah, we are, as we say, Wisconsin football analysis from a fan perspective. That is sort of our tagline. We try to be, we are freely open about our rooting interest. We are Badger fans, but we are not fanboys. We are also not rage baity. We just try to sort of look at things as objectively as we can, or at least trying to be aware of our biases towards the team and just try to understand what it's doing better than we would if we were just sort of watching it. And Max and I, my partner, as I said, we've been doing it for a while. We have a good time. And I always say one of our if you want the sales pitch on it, it's a significant portion of our listenership are non-Badger fans, like a not insignificant portion, like a quarter of it, I'm guessing, just based on sort of the geography of where people listen and the comments we get. And we're not annoying. And we have a good time with it. So, we don't get that mad. We just get annoyed. So that's always a good way to put it. We won't make you mad if you listen. But if you want to come find us, simplest way, you can search for us in any of your podcatching apps, but just go to buckaroundpodcast.com and that links to I have it set up to go to our link tree that gives you everything there. But that's the quick and easy.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And we'll definitely put all the descriptions in the description of the video. But it's funny you mentioned mad, because if I were a Wisconsin fan, I think of the injury bugs that you've had between, Tanner Mordecai. I mean, Graham Mertz, not maybe towards the tail end and what have you. And I guess when I think of this Wisconsin team, I think one of the things I admire about them most is just, the culture and the tradition and all those things. Cause I think of, Barry Alvarez, and I think of Paul Christ and, Gary Anderson, it is what it is with him. But, when you look at this Wisconsin team, they're, coming off a 4-8 season with, by the way, the Illinois win towards the end of the season, I would argue could be one of the reasons why Fickell got another year aside from the money. But when you look at this team overall and, you look at this recruiting class coming in, what are your kind of general thoughts in terms of where the team's going and maybe a couple things that you kind of say to yourself, hey, this is something to look forward to. Hey, this is something I'm kind of intrigued about?
So you said a lot of things there.
Yeah.
And we'll break it into some pieces.
Yeah.
So like before you and I started recording, you met, the thing you said, like, I like doing the show because I like to bring people on to talk about a team because there's just too many teams, right? I think it's 130 FBS teams, right? Plus or minus. I don't even know the number these days. And saying, oh, this team's had really bad injury luck. Like you said, Mordecai, Tyler Van Dyke. I mean, like it's one after the other, the quarterbacks. Things like, and then they've had plenty of injuries at receiver. This year it was fourth string running back. And you could say, yes, from 30,000 feet from that, I'm not picking on them, but like a Stu Mandel or an Andy Staples perspective, you're going to say, wow, that team's had really bad injury luck. And that plays a major part in what happened to this team. And you can say, as a person who sort of is more in the weeds of it and a little more granular, you say, yes, but there are other parts to it. So like a great example I would use, you could use the offensive line this year. Actually, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, let's start there.
Going into last spring, you pretty much, you did. It wasn't even penciled in. It was sharpied in. Your starting left tackle was going to be Kevin Haywood. If you're Luke Fickell, you went into, even last year, pretty quick after fall camp, after summer and fall camp, this true freshman, Kevin Haywood, was like, that guy's going to be our starter in 2 years. He didn't redshirt, which is kind of unheard of for an offensive. They used him on, extra points and field goal just to get him on the field. So he had game experience. I think he played, say, 55, 60 snaps of special teams and then some mop up. He was going to be the starter at left tackle this year. Spring practice comes around. He tears his ACL, out for the year. So he is not going to play in 2025. They kind of look around and decide they need a left tackle. They're out of NIL money is my guess, just because they weren't, this was, again, back when there's 2 windows. So they're like, we got to find somebody in the spring. They didn't have anybody internally that they felt confident just throwing out there. So they went and got this guy, Davis Heinzen, who came from one of the directional Michigans. I think it's Western. Guy who's from Wisconsin originally, 5th-year senior, blah, 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 blah. I'm willing to bet the biggest selling point on him was he did not cost anything, and they could probably talk him into, hey, you get to play for Wisconsin as a kid from, I think it's Brookfield, outside Milwaukee. So, sort of one of those, hey, why not? They bring him in. He's there through the summer. He's there through 15 fall camps. They get to the opener against Miami of Ohio, and within 20 snaps, it is quite clear he cannot play left tackle. He plays 45 snaps at left tackle, and by mid-third quarter, he's pulled. He's out of the game. They then scramble, throw some other bodies in there. I don't even remember who it was in that game, but they go into the next week, shuffle the whole offensive line. So they went through 15 practices and then half of a game again, a bye game against Miami of Ohio. We don't have a left tackle. And yes, did the injury to Kevin Haywood cause that? Yes, but downstream of it, what is the issue? Complete inability to evaluate what they had at tackle and how to adapt to it. And they then spent a good portion of the season trying to figure out who to play at left tackle. And they ended up moving the right tackle to left tackle, took the right guard, moved him to right tackle. Redshirt freshman Emerson Mandel wasn't very good at it, but he did it. And the guy that they thought in Davis Heinzen was going to be their starting left tackle by the end of the year was the 3rd string center, because he was kind of functional. He could snap the ball, because that was the other issue they had. They had their 3rd string redshirt freshman center couldn't snap the ball. He just wasn't there yet. He was getting blown up, and that's fine. He's supposed to marinate anyways. He wasn't really supposed to play. When you're down to 3rd stringers, unless you're, just pulling in blue chips at a rate that the Badgers don't, that's not sustainable. And even for a team that pulls in blue chippers, I think 3rd string centers are asking a lot. 3rd string anything on an offensive line. So I guess, to me, that was very symbolic of the issues they had, which was, yes, you had injury luck. You had bad injury luck, but you had no sort of like cohesive plan behind it. I mean, you could do the same thing at quarterback. You had an offense built around 2 years ago, Tanner Mordecai, athletic guy, not a quarterback who runs the ball, but is very athletic guy. He's low key. This is one of hills I'll die on. One of my favorite Badger quarterbacks I've seen, just because he was a dude. And if you watch the Badgers, that team was such a mess, and he was fun. But then he goes down. You have Braden Locke behind him, who's not an FBS level quarterback, just a misevaluation, and not really clear why that happened. You jump to last year. You had Tyler Van Dyke come in, who it was odd. They wanted him to be a guy who was going to be, pull the ball twice on a zone read a game, which is not who he was. Just he was not a mobile guy, but they wanted him to be something that he wasn't. He gets hurt. It's more Braden Locke, who by that time it was like, we don't need to see any more Braden Locke. We described it as the look, which was, you could tell that guy was on the field going, why do they still have me on the field? He knew he was out of his depth, and he has bounced around as a backup. He wants to coach.
Great. Yeah, then they had the Phil Longo experiment too at that time too that didn't really pan out.
Which the other part, I mean, there's other pieces to it. If you're, again, it's a good way to sort of get off me talking about quarterbacks for 45 minutes, but the Longo Fickell thing has nothing to do with offensive philosophy. Like, people have this thing, well, Wisconsin has to do this. There's no reason Wisconsin has to run, 12 personnel and march out full. Like, there isn't. There's no argument for it, except they did it for a long time. And even Paul Christ at the end, they spent 2/3 of their snaps in 11%. Like, that idea that that's what they kept doing until the end is not real. Like, it's great mythology. It's not real in practice. Like, if you go look at film. But the Longo thing was, Fickell has come around and sort of more or less, his mea culpa has been, you know what? I don't know a lot of coaches. I spent most of my career at Ohio State, and then I went to Cincinnati, found a few guys there, and most of the guys that I had at Cincinnati are now in South Bend, and I don't have a great coaching network. And Phil Longo was a guy he never worked with. It was, I met him at coaching clinics, and we had similar philosophies, whatever that meant. He brought him in. He brought in his offensive line coach, Jack McNeil, in that first season. They paid Jack McNeil not to work for a year. I mean, they fired him after the first year on a 2-year deal. It was just not working. And he was out of the building 2/3 of the way through the season. It was a very strange situation that, when it was the first one of those things, you go, well, you get the benefit of the doubt now. But then you start losing that benefit of the doubt, and they become red flags instead of, well, the coach has got to, do what he wants. But you bring in an offensive coordinator to run your offense, and then you fire his offensive line coach after a year. It doesn't look great. Jeff Grimes is a guy that he doesn't have a background with either. But he just knew he needed a change. And Phil Longo was ready to get out of town. He was ready to, I think he probably packed his bags for him to help him. And we'll see what happens. I mean, the offense this past year, the discussion we had was, you were looking at the quarterbacks they had on the roster, and there wasn't a consistent set of skills. Like, I don't quite get what they're going for. The Davis Heinsohn stuff we talked about at the beginning may have cost AJ Blazek, who's now at UCF, his job, just in terms of the lack of evaluation there. And so it's like, right, if you're making the case, this is it. It's Jeff Grimes just goes in and cooks on his own and figures out something, and Fickell just stays on the defensive side of the ball. And lets him cook, so to speak, and they try to figure something out there. I don't think it's going to be a huge, explosive, high-scoring offense, but if it's just enough to complement the defense, that's something. I mean, the defense only gave up 22 points a game. It wasn't like they gave up a ton of points. That's what I mean. It was could not score. You got me talking about this offense, and now I'm making me drink more.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, Could he figure it out now? Maybe. I think if you were to say what's the theme of Luke Fickell, like the through line you've seen, it's always been reacting to what happened to him before and assuming that's just going to continue. And sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't.
The best metaphor I can use for Luke Fickell, it's almost like when you were a kid and you had like 100-piece puzzle set and you got to maybe 65, 70 pieces, and then your dog steps on the piece, or you have to make dinner and clear the kitchen table. And then when you try to move the puzzle, you realize a couple pieces go flying. That's kind of how I feel with Luke Fickell. And now I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, you have the pieces of the puzzle. You got a guy in Colton Joseph who I believe is a guy you could legitimately build an offense around. Just like you mentioned before, you have a secondary that I think didn't get enough credit for what they did last year. And then you bring in a number of guys in the offensive line, receiver, tight end also too, which I definitely think they needed. And then here they are now just kind of trying to put that together and most importantly, get back into bowl contention.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to, it's a year one situation. I mean, the problem they really don't have guys they've developed internally. They have two linebackers in Posa and Catalano who are young. And outside of the two linebackers they have, you can't really say like, well, there is a guy that they identified, they developed, and he worked out. They've had some portal grabs, like Mason Rieger last year was a portal guy. But I mean, he was kind of a flyer guy who was injured for most of his career at Kentucky. And apparently, I think he was kind of medical there, so he needed a new home. And they lucked out that this guy kind of just turned out to be long and twitchy, and they took off. But they haven't really been, you can't point out like, well, there's a guy they identified in high school, they brought him in, they developed him, and he's been there. Like, it just hasn't happened. And to use the puzzle idea is not the worst. Well, actually, that's a pretty good way to think of it. Like, Fickell's first 2 seasons, he brought in 5 offensive linemen in his recruiting classes. So he had 5 in 2024, 5 in 2025. And we were talking about portal, and we're like, well, half these guys leave, after 2 years. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Just keep bringing in 5 offensive linemen, and then you don't have to go hunting in the portal for leftovers, because that's largely what you're doing, right? Like, offensive tackles aren't out there unless they got pushed out, like they're not starting, or they're moving up from, Corn Belt University, and
Exactly.
you're like kind of taking a flyer and you're projecting. Whereas if you're bringing in 5 guys a year, you kind of let let it sort of drift up to the top, and everybody who percolates up are who are your starters, and then the other guys go and find new homes. And that seemed like a sustainable idea for them. It's just like, take 30 guys in the high school ranks a year. And he was sort of doing that on the offensive line until this last year. He's like, well, we realized like when our 3rd string center can't play well, I can't bring 5 guys a year. I need to bring guys in who are ready to play from the portal. And you're like, are they? Like, is that a better value prop? Like, I don't know if it is. Like, it says more, I feel like, about your talent development or evaluation or deployment, whatever you want to call it, that when you're getting 2nd and 3rd year guys, like, you can't use them in a pinch. Like, that's more about you than like your strategy. That's more what you're doing. So we'll see if he's figured something out. I've seen enough that hasn't worked that he's got, like, they don't get my benefit of the doubt, if that makes sense.
Exactly too. And it's not, it's not like it's his first rodeo. He did a number, I think it was like 6, 7 years at Cincinnati. And not to mention that 1 year that he had at Ohio State, I think it was pretty sure it was after the Jim Tressel scandal too. So he did have a full year there too. So it's one of those things where I feel like I like the guy, but also part of me is like, you can only give him so many more chances too.
It's really fascinating because, I do think, so here's the thing where we kind of, like, Max and I have come down on our show. I was a big fan of the idea when they hired him. Cool, go for it. No idea if it's going to work, but go for it. I mean, on paper, it made total sense. I mean, you hired a coach who coached in the college football playoff. I mean, that's legitimate. I mean, that was a home run hire in that respect. Like, there's no arguing that wasn't like on paper an A+, like you picked a good guy and you got him, which was not something Wisconsin ever does. It's very against type. And McIntosh kept it quiet because everybody in Madison was reporting Jim Leonard's going to be the head coach. Like that's going to be the guy. Yeah. It made sense just based on what they do. That was the guy. And he came in for whatever reason, it's not working. I don't think Luke Fickell's dumb. I don't think he doesn't know how to coach. I mean, again, he has a track record. You can't just say like, well, he just had a meet. Like the simple explanation is, well, look at the coordinators he had and look what they're doing now. Yeah, but they still hire the coaches. Like I know we've all got, Gus Malzahn in our brains, like back in the day, but it's like, I don't think the narrative is ever that simple. Like I don't accept it as
exactly.
There's more that we don't know. Like you can't argue it because there's a lack of information, but whatever the case may be, we'll see. I mean, in the end, did it not work? Probably. I mean, is it going to work? Probably not, but we're going to find out.